Hey, welcome to the Mistwood Publishing Book Club. I am your host, S.R. Mowry, and today we'll be looking at The Veil of Stars, Chapter 3, Every Story Has a Beginning. Alright, so this chapter, there's a lot going on. We have a lot of characters introduced. It's not the longest chapter ever, but it is very important. So at this point, you've really met all of the major characters on the front cover. Some of them aren't in their outfits that you see on the cover yet, like Narbad doesn't have that armor, Talia doesn't have that armor. Ruth kind of does, but also not. So, but anyway, you know what their faces are. And I'll show them in the visual companion here in a minute. But we are opened up to Ruth training Talia. And we're very quickly do we realize that Ruth is a little bit of an impatient brother. And that Talia is rather insecure with her military abilities, specifically with archery. And so we're kind of introduced to this dynamic of the brothers very capable. He's a very capable warrior. They are the son and daughter of the kings of this elven kingdom. So, yeah, Ruth is very capable, and Talia is not. Talia, as we find out in this chapter, very much so feels like she should be a capable warrior, but isn't, and so she has a lot of insecurities with that. And Ruth is kind of an arrogant, you're kind of almost like your stereotypical arrogant elf, but there is a lot more to him than that, as we will come to find out. So Ruth is training her, and they're having a pretty frank conversation. And I will say I did tap into a little bit of myself a lot in this character. Ruth tends to be my more pessimistic side, although I wouldn't classify myself as an arrogant person, because I just really hate arrogance in general. I do identify with Ruth's pragmatic point of view. So he's like, you can lie to yourself about what war is all you want, but war is war. Your idealism will only get you killed. Might as well be calling the sky green and the grass blue. And Talia says, is the world so absolute? And Ruth says, the world might be gray, but the battlefield is black and white and red. No compromise. The only things of importance out there are efficiency and keeping your soldiers safe. Unfortunately, they don't always go hand in hand. Either way, you have to help. You have to keep your wits about you, or you'll be burying another sibling. So we find out that they've lost a sibling, which we will come to find out further and further kind of what that means for both of them, and how that played out as we go through this book and the next book as well. But most of it you'll get from this book. So right away we know we have a very strong impression of who these characters are. Talia is kind of the glass half full, optimistic, everything's dandy. She's never seen a battle before. She's never been in a battle before. But she has watched her younger brother die. Ruth, on the other side of the coin, is very experienced. He's seen the way that the world is, and he's kind of bitter and pessimistic about that. He's kind of a no-nonsense kind of person. And so his quote there of, basically saying, you can lie to yourself and say the world is this way or that way, but that doesn't change what it is. That's very much so coming from me. Like, that's something I very much so believe. So I think a lot of people shield themselves with this idealism. Well, it's not that bad, or people aren't that bad. And I'm like, that's really great, but that kind of intentional ignorance is what's going to get you hurt. So Ruth is saying, like, look, you can call a bucket of urine Granny's peach tea all day long. It's still a bucket of urine, sort of thing. Which is it's one of my favorite lines from Batman vs. Superman, which is a movie I really enjoy, which might be controversial. But anyway, so that's very much so something that I believe, and that doesn't mean that optimism doesn't have a role to play, but we shouldn't let it make us unprepared for what's going to come, and make us naive. And so Ruth's just having this really frank conversation with her, and, some people might think, well, Ruth is just really angry, he's really mean, he's really just a terrible brother. But in reality, he's doing these things and he's saying these things because he loves her. You have to realize he's lost a brother. He doesn't want that to happen again. He doesn't want to lose another sibling. So he's going to be hard on her because he doesn't want to lose his sister too. So although he's harsh, he thinks, from his perspective, he thinks he's doing what's best. He's doing what he thinks she needs. So I personally love the dynamic between these two. I think this scene sets up their dynamic and kind of their relationship very well, while planting the seeds of, hey, there's more still to be revealed for both of these characters and what has happened in their past, and obviously where they're going in the future. So then they're interrupted, and their father wants to see them, the king. So Talia then goes off on her own, where we finally get access to more of her internal dialogue, and we get to see more of her personality. And with this, I really wanted to showcase that innocence, as well as the way she thinks is almost very like scatterbrained, or I don't know, maybe childlike a little bit, but also very real. And it's because that's pretty much the way my brain works. The way her internal thought works is how my internal thought works. Although, the way hers works is like a female version of it, so it's not mine exactly. So like when she's like, maybe a daring knight from a far-off land will take me away on a diplomatic mission to his home country. Talia dared to dream as she's soaked, she's taking a bath. I'll solve this dispute and show everyone what I'm capable of. The knight and I will fall in love, but it won't be one-sided as it often is in the storybooks. He will need me just as much as I need him. Part of that, that's how kind of the rhythm of how my internal dialogue works, but it's applied to, a female. But in addition to that, anybody that really knew me growing up, like my dad and my siblings, they know that having a significant other was a big part of what I wanted in life. Talia wants a knight, and I wanted a princess, basically. It was very much so that way. I was a hopeless romantic, and still am to some degree. So Talia, continues, she explains a few of the geographical things about the city that she lives in. So we kind of see where Talia is, mentally, how she sees herself, what her hopes are. We kind of get a glimpse as to the relationship she had with her grandmother, and she arrives at the, beside her father in the throne room, and her hair is still wet, and so we kind of get a glimpse to how much she thinks about she kind of overthinks everything. And that's totally me. That's like me to the T. I overthink things. I overthink everybody's motivations for things. And we definitely see that in Talia's internal dialogue. And so Rollo comes in. Rollo and Groll come into and Elsa come into the throne room. That's the big guests. And these are, again, Rollo is the first griffin. But the other two are these lowercase gods that were made around the same time that the orcs were, as I've mentioned in previous chapters. And so they clear out the court and they want to have this conversation. And basically it's tying in what Karam did was he stole the Valnot, or at least part of it. He wasn't successful in taking all of it because Grohl showed up, but so basically they're coming before the most powerful king, perhaps in the continent, and saying, hey, we need you to take on this task. We need you to be a part of the team, or find someone to be a part of the team, because if we don't get this artifact back, we're all doomed, basically. That's why they're there. They have this, basically this quest, be like, hey, we need to recover the Valnot. We need to recover the, specifically one piece of it called Vidar, right? So we kind of get the impression that King Tillenwell is pretty arrogant. Maybe that's where Ruth gets it from. We learn that his relationship with his children is not exactly the greatest, and there are a number of other littler, smaller things that we hear about. And we also get Talia's internal dialogue through the whole thing, which I think is a little cute. Her thinking about Grohl, and the fact that Grohl maybe can hear her thoughts and kind of is responding to that. She's kind of still daydreaming about her getting a knight and all of that while they're talking about all of this mission, because she doesn't really think it's necessarily going to apply to her until maybe she gets the idea that maybe if she goes on this quest, she will meet her knight and she'll get, her dream, right? So, a lot of introduction there to Talia, and, she's a very interesting character. She's kind of plagued that night with labored sleep, because she's suddenly realizing, this thing that she didn't really think much of maybe does apply to her, and maybe her dreams aren't as far-fetched as she thinks. But she is kind of approaching this very dangerous quest from a very naive perspective, and that's kind of Talia. She's naive, she's hopeful, she's got very unique internal dialogue, she overthinks things, including her, herself, and that's Talia. And Ruth is the confident, arrogant brother who has been hardened by a hard life, and we will continue to get to know them very much so in this book and perhaps the next as well. So the next part of the book is basically Bjorn and Is kind of meeting up with Karam and kind of saying, okay, you didn't get all of it, but you did get the part that matters. They're obviously a lot less merciful in their word choice. But basically they decide not to destroy Karam, but to use him instead, and basically set Karam up with the plan of what they're going to do. So this chapter really kind of sets up the plan of, this is the hero's reaction to this event, and this is the villain reaction to this, what has happened and what their plans are. So the next chapter, Leaving Home, we have 3 storylines set up now. We have the Talia storyline, we have the villain storyline, and we have the Narbad storyline. And, obviously, from the cover, you can tell that these storylines are going to all meet at some point. And so in the next chapter, we're with Narbad, I believe, for most of it. But we do also go back to Ruth and Talia, and we meet a lot of the other characters in the visual companion. I think it's actually split 50-50 between Narbad and Talia. And that's kind of how the next few chapters go, until maybe the 2 paths merge. If you're really paying attention to where Grohl and Rollo are telling them that they need to go first, and you look at the map, you would realize that they want them to go to Nokfjord, which is where Narbad is. So it doesn't take a genius to figure out, maybe things are headed in a similar direction. How exactly that all plays out is quite eventful. We got a lot of stuff coming up. We got a pretty big battle coming up that's pretty intense. Narbad, he's got some stuff coming up that he's going to have to deal with. Before we leave, we have the visual companion for Talia and Ruth. which again you can see on the cover here. But we also have this artwork, and we actually have T-shirts for both of these artworks as well. And so the visual companion comes with a nice big zoomed up view of this part of the cover, which I personally really like. So those are the two new characters we met in this chapter.